Now Geirald the coward was punished. Once upon a time there lived a poor knight who had a great many children, and found it very hard to get enough for them to eat. One day he sent his eldest son, Rosald, the brave and honest youth, to the neighboring town to do some business. And here Rosald met a young man named Geirald, with whom he made friends. Now Geirald was the son of a rich man who was proud of the boy, and had all his life allowed him to do whatever he fancied. And luckily for the father, he was prudent and sensible, and did not waste money, as many other rich men might have done. For some time he had set his heart on traveling into foreign countries, and after he had been talking for a little while to Rosald, he asked if his new friend would be his companion on a journey. "There's nothing I should like better," answered Rosald, shaking his head sorrowfully. "But my father is very poor, and he could never give me the money." "Oh, well, if that's your only difficulty, it is all right," cried Geirald. "My father has more money than he knows what to do with, and he will give me as much as I want for both of us. Only, there is one thing you must promise me, Rosald, that supposing we have many adventures, you will let the honor and glory of them fall on me." "Yes, of course, that is only fair," answered Rosald, who never cared for putting himself forward. "But I cannot go without telling my parents. I'm sure they will think me lucky to get such a chance." As soon as the business was finished, Rosald hastened home. His parents were delighted to hear of his good fortune, and his father gave him his own sword, which was growing rusty for want of use, while his mother saw that the leather jerkin was more. "Be sure you keep the promise you made to Geirald," she said, and she bade him goodbye. "And come with me. See that you never betray him." Full of joy, Rosald rode off, and the next day he and Geirald started off to seek adventure. To their disappointment, their own land was so well governed that nothing out of the common was very likely to happen. But directly they crossed the border to another kingdom, all seemed lawlessness and confusion. They had not gone very far when, riding across a mountain, they caught a glimpse of several armed men hiding amongst the trees in their path, and remembered suddenly some talk they had heard of a band of 12 robbers who lay in wait for rich travelers. The robbers were more like savage beasts than men, and lived somewhere at the top of the mountain in caves and holes in the ground. They were called the Hunter, and were distinguished one another by the name of the color, blue, gray, red, and so on, except for the chief, who was known as Hunker the Tall. All this and more rushed into the minds of the two young men when they saw the flash of their swords in the moonlight. "It is impossible to fight them. They're 12 and 2, whispered Geirald, stopping his horse in the path. "We had much better ride back and take the lower road. It would be stupid to throw away our lives like this." "Oh, we can't turn back," answered Rosald. "We would be ashamed to look anyone in the face again. Besides, it is a grand opportunity to show you what we are made. Let us tie up our horses here and climb up the rocks so that we can roll stones down on them." "We might try that, and then we still always have our horses," said Geirald. So they went up the rocks, silently and carefully. The robbers were lying all ready, expecting every moment to see their victims coming around the corner a few yards away, when a shower of huge stones fell on their heads, killing half of the band. The others sprang up the rock, but as they reached the top, the sword of Rosald swung around, and one man after another rolled down into the valley. At last the chief managed to spring up, and, grasping Roswell by the waist, flung away his sword, and the two fought desperately, their bodies swaying always near the edge. It seemed as if Roswald, being the smaller of the two, must fall over, when with his left hand he drew the robber's sword out of his sheath and plunged it into his heart. He then took the dead man, a beautiful ring set with a large stone, and put it on his own finger. The fame of this wonderful deed soon spread through the country, and people would often stop Geirald's horse and ask leave to see the robber's ring, which he was said to have stolen from the father of the reigning king. And Geirald showed them the ring with pride, and listened to their words with praise, and no one would have ever guessed anyone else had destroyed the robbers. In a few days they left the kingdom and rode to another, where they thought they would stop through the remainder of the winter, for Geirald liked to be comfortable, and did not care about traveling through ice and snow. But the king would only grant them leave to stop on one condition. Before the winter ended, they should give him some fresh proof of courage which he had heard so much. Roswald's heart was glad at the king's message, and as for Geirald, he felt that as long as Roswald was there, all would go well. So they both bowed and replied that it was the king's place to command, and theirs to obey. "Well then," said his majesty, "this is what I want you to do. In the northeast part of my kingdom there dwells a giant who has an iron staff 20 yards long, and he is so quick in using it that even 50 knights have no chance against him. The bravest and strongest young men of my court have fallen under blows of that staff, but as you overcame 12 robbers so easily, I feel that I have reason to hope that you may be able to conquer the giant. In 3 days from this you will set out." "We will be ready, your majesty," answered Roswald, but Geirald remained silent. "How can we possibly fight against a giant that has killed 50 knights?" cried Geirald when they were outside the castle. "The king only wants to get rid of us. He won't think about us for the next 3 days. That is one comfort, and so we shall have plenty of time to cross the borders of the kingdom and be out of reach." "We mayn't be able to kill the giant, but we certainly can't run away till we've tried," answered Roswald. "Besides, think how glorious it will be if we do manage to kill him. I know what sort of weapon I shall use. Come with me now, and I will see about it." And, taking his friend by the arm, he led him to a shop where he bought a huge lump of solid iron, so big that they could hardly lift it between the two of them. However, they just managed to carry it to a blacksmith's, where Roswald directed that it should be beaten into a thick club with a sharp spike on one end. When this was done to the liking, he took it under his arm. Very early the third morning, the two men started on their journey, and on the fourth day they reached the giant's cave before he was even out of bed. Hearing the sound of footsteps, the giant got up and went to the entrance to see who was coming. And Roswald, expecting something of the sort, struck him such a blow to the forehead that he fell to the ground. Then, before he could rise to his feet again, Roswald drew out his sword and cut off his head. "It was not so difficult after all, you see," he said, turning to Geirald, and placing the giant's head on a leather wallet he slung over his back. They began their journey back to the castle. As they drew near the gates, Roswald took the head from the wallet and handed it to Geirald, whom he followed into the king's presence. "The giant will trouble you no more," said Geirald, holding out the head. And the king fell on his neck and kissed him, and cried joyfully that he was the bravest knight in all the world, and that a feast should be made for him and Roswald, and that the great deed should be proclaimed throughout the kingdom. And Geirald's heart swelled with pride, and he almost forgot that it was Roswald and not he who had slain the giant. By and by a whisper went round that a beautiful lady who lived in the castle would be present at the feast, with 24 lovely maidens for her attendants. The lady was the queen of her own country, but as her father and mother had died when she was a little girl, she had been left in the care of the king, who was her uncle. She was now old enough to govern her own kingdom, but her subjects did not like being ruled by a woman, and said that she must find a husband to help her in managing her affairs. Prince after prince had offered himself, but the young queen would have nothing to say to any of them, and at last she told her ministers that if she was to have a husband at all, she must choose him for herself, as she would certainly not marry any of those whom they had selected for her. The ministers replied that in that case she had better manage her kingdom alone, and the queen, who knew nothing about business, got things in such a confusion that she threw them up together and so went off to her uncle. Now when she heard how the two men had slain the giants, her heart was filled with admiration and courage, and she declared that if a feast was held, she would certainly be present at it. And so she was. And when the feast was over, she asked the king, her guardian, if he would allow the two heroes who killed the robbers and slain the giants to fight a tournament the next day with one of her pages. The king gladly gave his consent and ordered the lists to be made ready, never doubting that the two great champions would be eager for such a chance and aiding to their fame. Little did he guess that Geirald had done all he could to persuade Rosald to steal secretly out of the castle during the night. For, he said, I don't believe that the pages at all, and they're well-proven knights, and how can we, so young and untried, stand up against them? The honor will be all the higher if we gain the day, answered Rosald. But Geirald would not listen, and only declared that he did not care about honor, and would rather be alive than have every honor in the world heaped upon him. He would go, and as Rosald had sworn to give him his company, he must come with him. Rosald was very much grieved when he heard these words, but he knew that it was useless attempting to persuade Geirald, and turned his thoughts from forming some plan to prevent this disgraceful fight. Suddenly, his face brightened. Let us change clothes, he said, and I will do the fighting, while you shall get all the glory. Nobody will ever know. And to this, Geirald readily consented. Whether Geirald was right or not in thinking that the so-called page was really a well-powered knight, it is certain that Rosald's task was a very hard one. 3 times they came together with a crash that made their horses reel. Once Rosald knocked off the helmet of his foe and received in return a blow that he staggered in the saddle. Shouts went up from the lookers-on. One and then the other seemed gaining victory, but at length Rosald planted a spear in the armor which uncovered his adversary's breast and bore him steadily backwards. "Unhorsed! Unhorsed!" cried the people, and Rosald then dismounted and helped his adversary to rise. In the confusion that followed, it was easy for Rosald to slip away and return Geirald to his proper pose, and in turn, the torn and dusty from the fight, Geirald answered the king's summons to come before him. "You've done what I expected you to do," he said, "and now choose your reward." "Grant me, sir, the hand of the queen, your niece," replied the young man, bowing low, "and I will defend her kingdom against all her enemies." "She should choose no better husband," said the king, "and if she consents, I do too." And he turned towards the queen, who had not been present during the fight, but had just slipped into a seat by his right hand. Now the queen's eyes were very sharp, and it seemed to her that the man who stood before her, tall and handsome though he might be, was different in many slight ways, and in one particular from the man who fought the tourney. How could there be any trickery she could not understand, and why the real victor would be willing to give up his prize to another was still stranger. But something in her heart wanted her to be careful. She answered, "You must be satisfied, uncle, but I am not. One more proof I must have. Let the two men now fight against each other. The man I marry must be the man who killed the robbers and the giant, and overcame my page." Geirald's face grew pale as he heard these words. He knew there was no escape from it now, though he did not doubt for one moment that Rosald would keep his compact loyal to the last. But how would it be possible that even Rosald should deceive the watchful eyes of the king and his court? and still more those of the young queen, whom he felt uneasily had suspected him from the first. The tourney was fought, and in spite of Geirald's fears, Rosald managed to hang back to make attacks which were never meant to succeed, and to allow strokes which he could easily have parried to attain their end. At length, after a great show of resistance, he fell heavily to the ground, and as he fell he knew it was not alone, and the glory that was his rightfully which he gave up, but the hand of the queen that was more precious still. But Geirald did not even wait to see if he was wounded. He went straight to the wall where the royal banner waved and claimed the reward which was now his. The crowd of watchers turned towards the queen, expecting to see her stoop and give some token to the victor. Instead, to the surprise of she merely smiled, and said that before she bestowed her hand one more test must be imposed, and this should be the last. A final tourney must be fought. Rosald and Geirald should meet singly 2 knights of the king's court, and he whom could unhorse his foe should be master of herself and her kingdom. The combat was fixed to take place at 10 o'clock the following day. All night long, Geirald walked about his room, not daring to face the fight that lay in front of him, and trying with all his might to discover some means of escaping it. All night long he moved restlessly from door to window, and when the trumpet sounded and the combatants rode into the field, he alone was missing. The king sent messengers to see what had become of him, and he was found, trembling with fear, hiding under his bed. After that, there was no need of further proof. The combat was declared unnecessary, and the queen pronounced herself quite satisfied, and ready to accept Rosald as her husband. "You forgot one thing," she said when they were alone. "I recognize my father's ring which hangs with a tall stone on the finger of your right hand." "Yeah, and I knew it was you and not Geirald who had slain the robber band. I was the page who fought you, and again saw the ring on your finger, though it was absent from his when he stood before me to pay his promise. That was why I ordered the combat between you, though your faith to your word prevented my plan from succeeding. But I had to try another. A man who keeps his promise at all costs to himself is a man I can trust, both for myself and for my people." So they married, and returned to their kingdom, which they ruled well and happily. And many years after, a poor beggar knocked at the palace gates and asked for money, for the sake of days gone by. And this was Geirald.